would you counsel someone if you're having this epiphany for the first time? What are some things like, you see these 3 things, we got it for sure?
What you see in vulnerable narcissistic people is a chronic grudge. That's what it is. It's the chronic grudge. It's in a lot of it comes out in political conversations, but it could even be like, that neighbor, your brother. It's like it's grudge. It's a constant grudge and grievance. And there's the grudge and grievance is as though even these sort of random things that happen to be happening in the world seem to be targeted at them. So that takes us to the second thing, which is this chronic sense of suspiciousness. People are kind of out to get them, that the bad things are negatively targeting them. They're just literally a hair away from seeming paranoid, right? It really feels as they almost feel like people are out to get them, but it's not quite that bad, but it's this sense of, he's always trying to make me mad. I'm like, no, I think he just parked his car there. I don't think he was thinking about it. This is a good parking spot, right? But they're thinking that the person parked the car there to piss them off.
Yes.
They make the person's parked car about them. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I feel like I'm having a trauma response as I hear you describe this, because grudge and this edge
and the suspiciousness,
and that it's like happening to
it's
the traffic.
Me.
And so many people have moved here and the traffic is really terrible, and somehow it's personal to me. Or you're too busy at work, and so you never come to see me.
That's right. So it's that. And then the third piece is that victimhood. One thing that Keith Campbell and I talked about, which is it's the sense of the grandiose narcissist. They'll have a big dream, and it's big, and they'll do the thing, right? And they might even succeed. In fact, I think all the big things in our lives, the big stuff, probably there's a lot of grandiose narcissism behind that. The vulnerable narcissistic people talk about the big thing, and they never take the step. And they never take the step because everyone's against them. I got the idea for the biggest book ever. It's the biggest book ever. Like, wait till you hear about this. Like it's going to be so great. Not one word to paper. And like, oh, you know what, Mel, you got so many easy breaks. It was really easy for you. Like, my idea is way bigger than your idea, Mel. But I'm not going to waste my time with these publishers. They're not able to see how great I am. It's that. Does that make sense? They're going to put you down. They're going to lift themselves up. They never do the thing, but they talk as though they are doing it. That's a real hallmark of vulnerable narcissism. And ultimately, it looks like failure to launch.
Can you explain triangulation? That was a term that my therapist used that really had me go ding, 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 ding. And I think it's tied into the grudge and that feeling of like the world is against me. But can you explain that behavior of triangulation?
So triangulation's a power move, right? So there's another piece to remember about vulnerable narcissism is there's a lot of passive aggression there, right? Passive aggression is a real signature characteristic of vulnerable narcissism, and things like the silent treatment and all of that. What passive aggressive and grudgy people do is they talk through other people. They talk through a third party, right? So at times it can feel gossipy, but instead of coming directly to you, talking directly to you, they will plant all these victimized seeds in other people who are fertile targets. Those people might even sympathize with the vulnerable narcissist, making the person who should have been on the other side of the direct communication the villain. So by doing this, they actually, in some strange way, lift themselves up. Everyone's like, oh, I'm so sorry. That person should have been more supportive. I'm so sorry this happened to you. Let me see if I can talk to them. And then that person who you may actually have a good relationship with is now coming to you, and you're like, what? And now you're kind of having friction with the messenger, but the messenger is really just carrying the bag of grudge that the vulnerable narcissist gave them. And when this happens, you can imagine where this really happens is workplaces. One vulnerable narcissist can upend a really good work team.
Can you give us some examples?
So a great example of that would be you've got the victimized vulnerable narcissist who doesn't want to work as hard as everyone else, who feels like things should come easier, who might even be jealous of other people in the workplace that are leveling up, right? So they complain to other people. Vulnerable narcissist is savvier than you think because they're paying attention to who the fertile targets are, who's willing to sit with them, who's willing to say, no, you're really smart too. I could totally see this working out for you. But what they're doing, though, too, is they're raising suspicion about, oftentimes, the mission and vision of the organization or other people who are succeeding in the organization. And what it does is it ruins the sense of collaboration. So it would be that person who's just like, can you believe her? Like, I don't know. I'm not such a big fan of her. And then they keep talking and talking. Enough people start to agree. And then you'll see eye rolling at a meeting. Or you might see people just, like a lot of that stuff. And then people are noticing, like, gosh, it feels more tense here than it always was. But it was that one vulnerable narcissistic person who didn't want to do the work, who was always complaining, who was very entitled, but in this grudging way. So people felt guilty about it, felt pity for them. And now all of a sudden the energy in the room has changed. In a family, forget about it.
I sound like, I feel like you're describing a family and a parent that then goes to a sibling who's mad at the other sibling. And so that sibling becomes a messenger. Friend groups where the person who feels left out goes to a friend to complain that they feel sad, so that the friend then goes to the person organizing the party. So-and-so feels left out. Wow. And then what it does, though, is when we really see triangulation at the highest levels, the narcissistic person's almost like a puppeteer pulling the strings. They get to be above it all, and they get to watch all the chaos that's starting to ensue. So what was once a healthy family, healthy work group, healthy group of friends is now more fractured, centralizing more power in the narcissistic person. So does the person that has a narcissistic personality style, are they conscious that they're doing this? Or is it like this immature, emotional, kind of stunted growth inside them that means that when they feel triggered or they feel that sense of grudge or the entitlement or the insecurity rises up, that the emotion floods? And this is just what they do.
So this is where some people make the argument that narcissism is a trauma response, right? They're very quickly trying to feel safe. As the shame bubbles up, the only way I can describe, can I use a gross reference?
You can do what, you are the world's leading expert.
Right? Okay, this is really gross and down market, but I'm going to say it. If you've ever had terrible diarrhea, okay, I'm just going to be this gross because this is as gross as it gets. And you're like, oh my God, if I don't get to a bathroom, I'm going to shit my pants.
Yes.
Right? Think of the shame associated with that. And when you think of the shame, like I'm about to shit my pants in an airplane, in an airport, in a work meeting. Think of how you feel. Like,
well, and also the urgency. Like, I'm like, I got to, like, this is this, like, right now, get out of my way.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So you're not listening to the meeting.
No.
You're not listening to the conversation. You're like, I have to get to a bathroom or I'm about to embarrass the hell out of myself. This is awful.
And it gets to the point where you don't even think.
Right.
It, like, overrides.
Okay. So that diarrhea is how a narcissistic person feels every time that shame starts to come up. That's the best way I can describe. So they're just like, they're not listening to their like shame coming up, but they don't even know it's shame. At least we know it's, what it is, right?
Yeah.
But they don't know. So it's this feeling of that sort of psychological diarrhea and they're like, nobody can see this. And so what do? Their equivalent of running to the bathroom is to become entitled and grandiose, or in most cases, rageful. When we look at Kohut's work on this, who a theoretician, wrote back in the 60s and 70s, he would say this shame and rage is one of the central cores of the narcissistic presentation. So what will happen is the psychological diarrhea, got to find a bathroom. The bathroom is, F you, Mel. You don't know what you're talking about. So now I'm powerful. Mel is small. Crisis averted.
When somebody who has a narcissistic personality style walks into a room, what might they be feeling?
They're casing the joint. You know how a thief or a burglar walks into a place or drives by a place and they're looking for all the places they could get in. Where could they get in? Where could they get caught? Where might the money be? That's what they're doing with you they're casing the joint every time they meet you. Like, what's the way in? Who's got the power in this room? Who do I need to sit next to? Who do I need to talk to? Where's the stuff? They case the joint. They walk into a cocktail party. Watching a narcissistic person walk into a party, I'm an introvert, so I don't like parties. So when I go, I try to figure out who the narcissists are so I can watch them work.
How do you spot them, other than the kid with the Versace sweatsuit on in the stroller and the mom tapping on her phone?
They're the adult with the Versace sweatsuit who are sitting in whatever the adult equivalent of a stroller is. They don't look at people, they look through them. They have a remarkable capacity to be able to look at you, but also be eyeing the door to see if someone more interesting is coming in, or if there's someone else more interesting at the bar. It may not be that they're more attractive. It's just that they may bring something cooler, more hip cred, more validation, more supply. They're always working the room. You can always see the sort of sweet, agreeable people they'll have the long, meandering, boring conversation because they've committed to it. And then they might find the graceful exit, or someone may, puncture the conversation. But the narcissistic person will just go and go until they find the best, if you will, target. Listen, I live in LA. So every so often, especially before the pandemic, I think since the pandemic, my dance card's been less full. But before, I'd go to parties where there'd be some people of some notoriety. Ooh, the narcissistic people. When they'd see that fame person walk in, it's a wonder they didn't trip trying to get over to them. Like, they would just abruptly leave conversations, and then they would just cleave themselves to the so-called famous, notorious, powerful Hollywood person. It was actually quite fun to watch. They're like heat-seeking missiles. As soon as they found the power center of a group, that's where they're going to put their focus.
You've got new research in It's Not You, and one of the things that you write about are the 4 myths about narcissism. Can you unpack those for us?
So, one of the key myths is that narcissistic people are always men. And I think that that's a dangerous myth, right? And again, I'm using the gender binary here. We still are, that this research is evolving. So keep in mind, research often has like a 10 to 15 year delay, if you will. But using the binary is that grandiose narcissists are more likely to be men. The combativeness.
What is the malignant narcissist?
Malignant narcissism is actually the most severe form of narcissism. I always call it the last stop on the narcissism train before it veers into psychopathy station. It's where we see the dark tetrad, where narcissism, Machiavellianism, or the willingness to exploit others, psychopathy, and sadism all come together. And that's a lot of what we see in malignant narcissism. They are more coercive. They are more exploitative. They are more manipulative. They're more isolating. They don't tend to have the big, bright, shiny, grandiose personalities.
So is this when you get into severe emotional and physical abuse?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. And it may not even be physical. It may just simply be severe, isolated, coercively controlling kinds of financial abuse, emotional abuse, that kind of thing. It's more menacing. And I think that those kinds of qualities, again, tend not to be selected for in women. So we're going to see that more in men. But when we talk about communal narcissism, that sort of savior narcissism, this is where we see everything from new age folks to cult leaders to people who think they're saving the world. And it's, well, people like saving the world. Like, what do you mean? They're rescuing puppies. How could that be bad? They're rescuing puppies, though, to get validation and admiration. They probably like the puppies well enough. But if nobody's recognizing all their puppy saving or their environmental saving or whatever it is they're doing, they get angry. They have to be recognized as humanitarians. They not only put themselves out there as these great humanitarian saviors, they still treat the people they're closest to quite terribly. Great example of this would be the person like, your dad, pillar of the community. You're so lucky to be his kid in the little league and the mayor in the small town. And behind closed doors is screaming at that family, humiliating them, shaming them. And yet the world says, your dad's a pillar of the community. That's a great example of communal narcissism.
So first myth, that men are the narcissists.
Right.
What's the next
The
myth?
second myth is that this is just bragging. It's just arrogance. It's just posturing. It's what we were talking about earlier. I think that somebody meets someone arrogant, they're like, oh, that's a narcissist. And I'll always say, slow down, sister. Like, let's spend a little bit more time. I'm digging in. I'm trying to find the entitlement. It's a little bit hard to find sometimes because it might take a minute to unfurl. That's why even therapists, it takes us a minute before we could really say definitively someone has a narcissistic personality or a narcissistic personality disorder. Just because the person's arrogant, just because a person's wearing designer labels, it doesn't mean they're narcissistic. So I say we have to be careful when it's sort of these forward kind of facing characteristics.
The grudge really hit me, and so did this distinction that you mentioned earlier between the difference between somebody being annoying versus somebody's behavior being harmful.
That's exactly right. And that's the piece where, this is what concerns me about the sort of the TikTokification of narcissism. Because what you're seeing there, and I've run into this over and over again, a lot of the folks out there who sometimes put out narcissism content were hurt by a narcissist. I'll give you a classical example. Somebody's boyfriend cheats on them. He's a narcissist. I'm like, he cheated on you, not okay, but I need more.
Right.
Okay, so I think that this idea that somebody cheats, that makes them a narcissist. Do narcissists cheat more than other people? Absolutely. Absolutely. Is everyone who cheats a narcissist? No. So I think that when a person's hurt in one way, they want to make that leap. We even have to be careful there. So yes, and it's annoying. It is immature. We really latch onto the superficiality part of it. Just because somebody puts selfies on Instagram, it doesn't make them a narcissist. They could just be a sweetie. They just might just say, look, an autumn leaves tree, and this is me in front of it. And in some ways, I look at those and I'm like, sweet, but it's a little immature.
Well, I think what you're saying is really good. So now I feel terrible about slamming the baby in the Versace thing, but
I'm willing to take that bet, Mel.
Because there are multiple check boxes
That's exactly
in that
right.
scenario in a certain age and behavior by parents.
That's right.
Because I don't blame the child.
No.
At all.
No.
And I also, in learning everything that I've learned, in a weird way, the person that I'm closest to in my life that has a narcissistic personality style, I don't even blame her. Or I shouldn't say them. I don't even blame them.
Right.
Because I understand what you're saying, which is this can be the result of adverse childhood experiences that stunts somebody's emotional growth.
Right. And this is where it gets the most tricky for survivors. Right?
Yes.
Because I hear you. And it's exactly what I know. And many of the people I've known who are narcissistic clients I've treated and all of that. To still keep pinning it down to, and their behavior is not acceptable. Number one, you're not responsible for their history. Number two, if they are a sentient, functional human being, they can take responsibility for their mental health. They have put you in the position of using you as a tool of regulation, pacifier, and punching bag. That's not okay, right? They can take responsibility, but they will dine out for the rest of their life on the idea of, I had a tough childhood. And they will, these days more than ever, will commandeer the rough childhood explanation as the explanation for their behavior. This is why I'm saying we have to be careful. While narcissism may be, in part, a trauma response, I'm going to push back on that a little, which is a person who had an adverse childhood and is having consistent trauma responses, for example, safety behaviors and all that, they tend to be consistent. The narcissistic person knows what they're doing. How do we know they know what they're doing? Because you've gone through this too. Think of the dinner party scenario. At the dinner party, they're so charming. In fact, someone even ribs them, makes a funny little joke at their expense, and they laugh, ha, 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 ha. You're thinking, maybe I judged this person wrong. Maybe they're not narcissistic. You get in the car at the end of the night, and they go off for the next hour. They knew what they were doing. They waited till they got in the car. That's not a lack of insight. They knew exactly what they were doing.
What is narcissism?
Narcissism is a personality style. Let's move the disorder piece off to the side.
Every time I talk to you, I start to wonder, am I a narcissist?